My friends, I took a deep breath last night, and I'll be honest, I'm still feeling it now. I humbly apologize, because yesterday after the game I just couldn't bring the analysis to you. So, take a look at this. Depending on which projection you trusted, the Steelers held between a 91 and 93% chance to not only make the postseason, but to win the AFC North and secure a home playoff game in 2025. Everything was right there. Control your destiny, take care of business, and the division was essentially locked up. Then Saturday night happened. Baltimore exploded for 41 points against Green Bay, and on Sunday, the Steelers walked into Cleveland and delivered one of the most frustrating performances of the entire season, losing 13-6 to a 3-win Browns team. This game didn't spiral because the defense collapsed. In fact, the defense deserves real credit. Outside of the first 2 drives, they settled in, forced turnovers, and consistently handed the offense short fields. Cleveland finished with under 300 total yards of offense. After those early possessions, the Browns were largely shut down. The problem is that none of it mattered, because the Steelers' offense completely failed to capitalize. 6 points, that's all they managed, in a game where one single touchdown likely would have been enough to win. And when you go back and watch how this game unfolded, it's impossible not to focus on the missed opportunities. Early on, a floater from Shedeur Sanders should have been intercepted by Kyle Duggar. Instead, it turned into a touchdown to Harold Fannin. That ended up being the difference in the game. Later, the Steelers dropped a potential pick six. Chris Boswell missed a field goal. On a crucial 4th and 1, the call was a deep shot to Scotty Miller instead of a high-percentage conversion. Inside the red zone late, with the game on the line, the offense couldn't punch it in. Time and time again, they crossed into Cleveland territory and came away with nothing. Personnel issues played a massive role, and there's no way around that. DK Metcalf was unavailable due to suspension, and that absence completely changed how Cleveland defended this offense. Without Metcalf on the field, the Browns were able to play aggressive man coverage, sit on routes, and take away yards after the catch. Marvin Valdez-Scantling and Aaron Rodgers never found any real rhythm or chemistry. Routes weren't synced, timing was off, and separation was almost non-existent. Pat Freiermuth was essentially the only consistent receiving threat, finishing with 63 yards and nearly 40 more than any other Steelers receiver, and even he wasn't heavily involved until late-game situations. The run game showed flashes, particularly from Jaylen Warren, but it was never leaned on enough to stabilize the offense. Third down efficiency tells the story. 3 conversions on 15 attempts. That's not just bad, that's losing football, especially when your defense is repeatedly giving you chances. This offense had been rolling coming into this game, and to see it collapse at the worst possible time makes the loss even harder to swallow. Then came the injury news that feels like a punch to the gut. Darnell Washington left the game early with a forearm injury and was declared out almost immediately. That alone was alarming. Shortly after, confirmation came that Washington broke his arm and is likely done for the season. Losing Washington is not just losing a tight end. He is a critical piece of this offense, both as a dominant blocker and as a yards after catch threat. His presence changes how defenses align and how the Steelers can function in both the run and pass game. Without him and without Metcalf, this offense simply does not look the same, and the film from Cleveland made that painfully clear. There was also controversy at the end, and while it shouldn't define the loss, it can't be ignored. On 4th and goal, Aaron Rodgers threw multiple fades to Valdez-Scantling. On the final attempt, Denzel Ward clearly made contact before the ball arrived, never turning to play the football. No flag, no call. Yes, the Steelers put themselves in that position, and yes, they had countless chances earlier to avoid relying on officiating. But the reality is that call likely sends the game to overtime, and possibly changes everything about how we're talking about this season right now. Instead, the Steelers walk out of Cleveland having gone from overwhelming division favorites to a team staring at uncertainty. What was once over a 90% chance to win the AFC North is now suddenly below 50%. Next week looms large, with Baltimore coming to Acrisure Stadium. No DK Metcalf. No Darnell Washington. Baltimore just ran for over 300 yards against Green Bay. Derrick Henry is rolling, and Lamar Jackson is expected back. The Steelers do get TJ Watt back, but even that feels like it might not be enough to offset what's missing on offense. This loss didn't just hurt in the standings. It changed the entire path. Instead of potentially earning a week off and needing 4 wins to chase a 7th Lombardi trophy, the Steelers are now staring at the possibility of needing 5 straight wins with less margin for error than ever. That's a massive swing, and it's why the mood around Pittsburgh feels so heavy right now. There's plenty of blame to go around, from discipline issues that led to suspension, to game planning, to execution, to late-game decisions. But more than anything, this felt like a moment where the opportunity was there, and the Steelers simply didn't take it. With the season now truly on the line heading into the Ravens matchup, how do you feel about what this loss means for the Steelers, and who do you believe deserves the most responsibility for what happened in Cleveland? Because now everything funnels into one unavoidable reality: the margin for error is gone. What happened in Cleveland didn't just put a dent in confidence, it stripped away the safety net the Steelers had built over months of football. All those ugly wins earlier in the season, all the games where this team found a way to survive instead of dominate, they were supposed to buy you breathing room. Instead, that cushion evaporated in one afternoon where execution failed at every critical moment. Heading into the final week, this no longer feels like a team managing a playoff push. It feels like a team trying to stop a season from slipping through its fingers. The Ravens game is no longer just about the AFC North title. It's about survival, momentum, and belief inside that locker room. The Steelers already beat Baltimore once this season, but that context matters. DK Metcalf had a massive impact in that game, drawing coverage, flipping field position, and forcing the Ravens to respect the deep threat. That element is gone now. Darnell Washington's physical presence, both as a blocker and as someone who punishes defenses after the catch, is gone as well. What remains is an offense that must reinvent itself on the fly, against a division rival that is peaking at the worst possible time. This puts an enormous spotlight on Aaron Rodgers. Fair or not, this is the moment the Steelers envisioned when they brought him in. Not to cruise through favorable matchups, but to stabilize chaos when everything around him breaks down. Against Cleveland, the timing wasn't there, the reads were late, and the offense looked disjointed. Some of that falls on receivers not winning their routes, some on play design, and some on Rodgers himself. Against Baltimore, there will be no room for hesitation. The Ravens will bring pressure, they will crowd the middle of the field, and they will dare the Steelers to beat them without their top weapons. It also puts the coaching staff under intense scrutiny. Arthur Smith's game plan in Cleveland never found an answer once it became clear that Metcalf's absence changed the defensive looks. The lack of adjustment, especially on third down and in short yardage situations, was glaring. Mike Tomlin, meanwhile, faces criticism that comes with moments like this. Conservative decisions, punts in key spots, and an offense that looked unprepared for a must-win scenario all circle back to the head coach. This was a chance to slam the door on the division, to give veteran players like Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, and Rodgers extra rest before the playoffs. Instead, the Steelers are now staring at the possibility of an extended road with no guarantees at the end of it. And yet, this is where the story gets complicated, because if there's one thing Steelers fans know better than anyone, it's that this team has a strange habit of responding when counted out. When expectations crater, when the narrative turns negative, when logic says it's over, that's often when Pittsburgh finds a way to punch back. The defense, with what returning, still has the ability to wreck a game. The home crowd at Acrisure Stadium will be as hostile as it gets. And divisional games, especially against Baltimore, have a way of ignoring logic, statistics, and projections. The problem is that hope alone doesn't win football games. Execution does. The Steelers must protect the football, finish drives, and find new ways to create offense with what's left. Pat Freiermuth's role will have to expand. Jaylen Warren in the run game will need to carry more weight, and Rodgers will need to elevate players who, up to this point, haven't proven they can consistently win when the lights are brightest. This season is no longer about percentages or projections. It's about one game that now defines everything. Beat Baltimore, and the conversation changes instantly. Lose, and the feeling coming out of Cleveland will only grow heavier. Steelers Nation has seen both endings before, which is why this moment feels so tense and so familiar at the same time. Now I want to hear from you. Do you still believe this team can respond when it matters most, or did the loss in Cleveland expose flaws that are simply too big to overcome at this stage of the season? And even beyond the Ravens matchup itself, the ripple effects of what happened in Cleveland are going to linger inside this building. This is the type of loss that forces uncomfortable conversations, not publicly, but internally. Veterans know what opportunities like this mean. They know windows don't stay open forever. When you have a chance to clinch the division, secure home field, and reduce the physical toll on an aging core, you cannot let that slip without consequences. That reality sits heavy on a roster led by players who have been through long playoff runs and also through seasons that ended far too early. What makes this situation even more tense is that the blueprint to win was right there on film. The defense showed it can still carry this team when needed. They generated turnovers, controlled the line of scrimmage after the opening drives, and kept the Steelers within striking distance for 4 quarters. That unit has earned trust. The offense, however, has now reached a crossroads. Without DK Metcalf and Darnell Washington, the Steelers cannot pretend to be the same team schematically. They will need to simplify in some areas and get more creative in others. That means quicker decisions, more commitment to the run, and far fewer wasted snaps in critical situations. There's also a psychological component that can't be ignored. Losing to a 3-win Browns team, in that fashion, tests confidence. Players say the right things publicly, but belief is fragile when execution collapses under pressure. How this team responds during practice this week, how they prepare, and how they come out in the first quarter against Baltimore will tell us a lot about whether this group is truly resilient or simply hanging on. The irony is that everything the Steelers want is still technically in front of them. The division is still reachable. The playoffs are still alive. The stage could not be bigger with Sunday Night Football and the Ravens in town. But the difference now is that nothing is guaranteed, and every flaw is magnified. This is no longer about potential. It's about proof. If the Steelers are going to flip the narrative, it has to start immediately, with urgency, discipline, and execution that simply wasn't there in Cleveland. Otherwise, this loss will be remembered as the moment the season slipped away. And this is why the Ravens game feels heavier than just another divisional matchup on the schedule. This is the moment where identity gets tested. All season long, the Steelers have leaned on resilience, on finding ways to win even when things were not clean or convincing. But resilience without execution eventually runs out, and Cleveland exposed that line. Against Baltimore, effort alone will not be enough. Details will matter. Play calls will matter. Situational football will matter. Every missed block, every misread route, every wasted possession will feel amplified because there is no longer a buffer to absorb mistakes. What also can't be ignored is how this game will define the perception of this season moving forward. A win against the Ravens changes everything overnight. It restores belief, resets momentum, and reminds the league that Pittsburgh is still capable of rising in chaos. A loss, however, locks in a narrative that this team peaked too early and couldn't adapt when adversity hit hardest. That's not just about standings, it's about legacy for the players and coaches involved, and about trust from a fan base that lives and breathes meaningful football in January. This is the point where leaders have to lead without speeches, where preparation replaces excuses, where the Steelers either lean into the moment or get swallowed by it. The door is still open, but it's closing fast, and what happens next will determine whether this season is remembered as one that slipped away or one that was saved when it mattered most. And that's what makes this stretch so unforgiving. There are no soft landings left, no we'll fix it next week mentality. Every snap from here on out becomes a referendum on preparation, toughness, and adaptability. The Steelers don't have the luxury of waiting for confidence to return naturally. They have to manufacture it through execution. That starts with doing the small things right, because Cleveland was a masterclass in how small mistakes pile up into a loss that changes an entire season. You can't ignore how thin the margin has become offensively. Without DK Metcalf commanding attention on the outside, defenses are no longer afraid to crowd the box or sit on intermediate routes. Without Darnell Washington sealing edges and creating physical mismatches, the run game loses its bite and the play action loses its credibility. That forces the Steelers to win in areas they haven't consistently dominated this year: precision passing, third down efficiency, and red zone execution. Those are not glamorous traits, but they are the difference between extending a season and watching it fade out. This is also where the mental toughness of this roster gets exposed. It's easy to play free and loose when projections favor you and momentum is on your side. It's much harder when every analyst questions your chances and every mistake feels magnified. The Steelers are now playing with pressure, real pressure, the kind that doesn't disappear until you answer it on the field. How they handle that will tell us more than any stat line ever could. And for all the frustration, anger, and disappointment coming out of Cleveland, there is still one undeniable truth. The Steelers control how this story ends. Not projections, not narratives, not what happened last week. One game can still flip the script. One disciplined, physical, mistake-free performance can remind everyone why counting out Pittsburgh has always been dangerous. But that's the challenge. Doing it, not talking about it, not hoping for it, actually lining up and earning it. And the reason this debate feels so divided among fans is because both sides have evidence. On one hand, you have a team that just lost to a 3-win Browns squad, scored 6 points, failed on third down, and looked completely out of sync offensively when one or two key pieces were missing. That's not noise. That's film. On the other hand, you have a defense that continues to give this team a fighting chance every single week, a quarterback who has lived through moments like this before, and a franchise that has built its reputation on responding when the lights are brightest and the odds turn uncomfortable. This is where the Steelers' culture is supposed to show up, not in slogans, but in execution. Culture doesn't convert 3rd and 1. Culture doesn't finish drives. Players do. Coaches do. Decisions do. And that's why next week isn't just another chapter, it's a fork in the road. One direction leads to validation, renewed belief, and a season that suddenly feels alive again. The other leads to regret, what-ifs, and the realization that opportunities don't wait around forever. What makes it even more intense is knowing how close this team was to avoiding this situation entirely. One clean interception instead of a touchdown. One made field goal. One successful fourth down conversion. One offensive drive finished properly. That's how thin the line is between locking up the division and standing on the edge of it. Football doesn't care how dominant you were last month or how favorable the projections looked a week ago. It only cares about what you do when the moment arrives. Now the moment is here, and it doesn't get bigger than Baltimore with everything on the line. No safety net. No excuses. Just answers or consequences. And this is why the next outcome will define how this entire season is remembered. Not just by fans, but inside the organization itself. Seasons like this don't fade quietly. They become reference points. Either this becomes the year the Steelers stared adversity in the face and refused to blink, or it becomes the year where everything unraveled the moment the margin disappeared. There's no middle ground anymore. What happened in Cleveland stripped away illusions. It forced clarity. The Steelers now know exactly who they are and, just as importantly, who they are not. They are not a team that can sleepwalk through opportunities. They are not a team that can afford to waste possessions, miss kicks, or rely on late miracles. They have to play clean, disciplined, physical football from the opening snap, because the version that showed up last week will not survive what's coming next. This also puts a spotlight on leadership in a way that stats never will. The huddle matters now. Sideline communication matters. Adjustments matter. The response to adversity within the game will matter just as much as the game plan itself. Baltimore will punch first. They always do. The question is whether the Steelers can absorb it, settle in, and respond instead of unraveling like they did when momentum slipped in Cleveland. Because once the ball is kicked off, none of the excuses follow you onto the field. Injuries don't. Projections don't. Percentages don't. All